like to welcome you to my new channel, Trinity's Emerald Triangle. I'm Trinity Benson, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you a whole lot better through the course of this series. I'm also hoping to build a community with you and other like-minded people. So, what happened? Oh gosh. In 2015, my husband Bob and my youngest son Trey, who is in his 20s, and I and 4 other boys on our crew were convicted of trafficking and laundering and conspiring to distribute marijuana. Trey and his crew ran their marijuana business from about 2010 here on the east side of Salt Lake City. They would go out to NorCal and broker to find weed and then come back and pretty much distribute it to every hopper and slinger on the east side and sometimes on the west side too. They eventually also bought a farm in Humboldt County on Spy Rock Road. Bob and I joined about a year later, and we would drive large amounts of cash out to NorCal to the boys before they would broker, and then they would broker their load it up, and we would bring it back. When a person is indicted of trafficking or distribution, like our crew was, what does that mean exactly? That means that you've moved over 1,000 kilos of illegal substance. 1,000 kilos equals about 2,200 pounds. I'm not saying that's all we moved. I'm just saying that's what they indicted us for. The feds called us the largest organized weed operation that the state of Utah had ever seen. They said we were organized. In my dreams. If only. Oh gosh. Those ADH boys nearly drove Bob and me cuckoo crazy. You have to understand that Bob and I were both raised as devout Latter-day Saints. Bob served a mission in Bolivia, and he and I met at BYU. I graduated with a degree in music, and Bob graduated from the law school at BYU. We raised our kids, including Trey, in the church for about 20 years. How is it that a family like ours can go from A to Z like that, going from being devout Mormons to being convicted of distribution for an illegal substance? It's kind of a huge disconnect, don't you think? I wrote a book called The Prodigal Daughter, and a lot of it is about that journey of the kind of the spiritual and psychological journey of going from A to Z like that. But there was so many things in the book that I had to leave on the cutting room floor about the industry. I was more about our story, but I left so much information about what it was like being in the industry that I decided to start this channel, Trinity's Emerald Triangle. There was just too many good things that I couldn't talk about in the book. It was such an intense experience being involved in the industry that I wanted to talk about it. People have often asked me, can you do that, Trinity? Can you talk about that? I mean, most people are thinking about murder and cartel and all the things. And most people don't really talk about being in the drug industry except amongst ourselves deep in the crevices of the night. But I am not worried that I'm going to be murdered because the crew that we were involved with was not like that. We weren't cartel, and it was just weed. Weed is a whole different energy than, say, like coke or meth or heroin. It's just it's a different animal. all of our people on our crew that were indicted are pretty much off paper. And so I don't have to worry about that so much. All of our crimes have been resolved through plea deals. And now I can talk about it, and they're not going to come back and indict me for anything because that would be what they call double jeopardy. Any of the names that I mentioned in the series are in the public domain. Other names, I won't be using people's names or telling their details to protect the innocent and quite a few of the guilty. It's kind of how it goes in this business. I've also had people ask me, why do you want to talk about this, Trinity? Why do you want to bring this out? One of the things that I thought was so ridiculous was that the government accused us of so much more than it was. I'm not saying that we didn't move large amounts of weed, but they sensationalized our case on the morning after they indicted us on the news, that we were really dangerous criminals and our drugs were dangerous, and the way they made it made us sound like, you know, we were carrying guns and robbing banks. You would have thought we murdered somebody the way they sensationalized the whole thing. And I just wanted to talk about what it really was. The government, when they indict people, they like to make themselves look like heroes, and they go in like RoboCops with their machine guns and their SWAT teams and their helicopters and all the things. But really, it's basically after months and months and years of going through all the boring emails, everybody's emails, the county records and the bank accounts and the phone, the big kickdown featuring the 30 DEA RoboCops wielding their semi-automatic rifles and scaring the crap out of the defendants who are completely unarmed. That's their big payoff. That's what they get after all that mundane, boring thing. It's not like they're going to be in a gunfight with anybody, but at least they can go in and kind of play house, that they're going after dangerous criminals. And really, I'm going to say this probably, if I don't say it 50 times, I'll say it 100 times. It was just weed. So I want to talk about this to let you know what the whole industry is like and what people really are like. Initially, when they came in and blew the doors open and arrested us and then later indicted us, they released the press release on the front page and in the news and said that we were looking at 10 years mandatory minimum to life sentences with a $5 million fine. That was the initial 10 years to 20 years mandatory sentencing with to life. They said to life with a mandatory sentencing and a $5 million fine. When the dust settled, we pled it down to one charge of conspiring and trafficking. And I also think that most of the boys also did a second charge with laundering. And the time that we actually did ended up being sentenced to what's called a year and a day. And you actually only serve basically 85% of that. I did 6 months in a women's federal facility out in Dublin, California, and the boys did 9 months in a prison camp also, and then you finish it out in the halfway house. So it doesn't really commute to 10 years to 20 years mandatory minimum or a life sentence by any means. They say that to the public to try to make it seem like it's so much worse, and they also do it to put the heat on you. One of the crew members, Cody, before he went down, he actually finished his business degree up at the U. And Trey, he was a certified yoga instructor, but he was too nervous to actually be a teacher. He hadn't although he was certified, he hadn't actually become a teacher. So when he was up in the Sheridan prison camp, he learned how to teach yoga to the inmates up there. And now, as we speak, he runs a yoga studio and he's a yoga instructor. So he ended up coming off with a few skills. I ended up finishing writing the book, The Prodigal Daughter, and coming up with ideas like this. And I work in a law office at this time right now. And so does Bob. The kingpin, Tiny, Trey was second in command, but Tiny, Colin Armstrong, that's who Tiny is, that's his name. He ended up just serving 15 months in a federal prison camp. So that's kind of what the end happened. Sometimes I've also had people ask me, well, are you sorry you did it? Nope. I have talked to Trey and Bob, and we talk about that a lot. We always say, well, are we sorry we did it? And we always say no. The price was very high. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to kid you. The price has been really high. It was pretty painful, but the experience was so intense and rich and amazing and unusual that it made us into people we wouldn't have been otherwise. And we had so much fun. On my pre-sentencing report and on all the boys, it said that this was a victimless crime. You know, there were no victims. I mean, I don't necessarily agree that it was a victimless crime because, you know, I think about all the marijuana that got distributed under our watch, and I just, you know, a lot of people died from that. A lot of people died from overdosing on marijuana that we put out there. Sorry, I had to say that because you just can't even believe some of the comments people make. There were victims though. My kids suffered. Anytime somebody goes to prison or jail, the whole family around them suffers badly. I had a lot of guilt about that. I will tell you the biggest victim in this whole situation, in our whole debacle, was the taxpayers. The drain on taxpayers supplementing the prison industry is astronomical. And I want to be real specific about that in our case. In the camp, right outside of the kitchen before you go in to get your food, there's a big plaque on the wall that said it costs $83,000 to house a federal inmate. It's $83,000 a year, and you multiply that by the five, just our tight crew, that comes to roughly $400,000 to $500,000. Then you add in Tiny's 15 months, his was over $166,000. So you're talking $500,000 to $600,000 just to house us for 1 year in the federal prison camps. The investigation over the 3 to 4 year period that they were investigating us costed at least $3 million and maybe $4. So you add up the investigation costs of $3 to $4 million and $500,000 to incarcerate us. We're talking about $4.5 to $5 million to take this little crew down for distributing weed. That's it, just distributing weed. That's a huge burden on taxpayers. They're supplementing through their taxes to take people like us down. My question to you is, do you think I was worth $4.5 million worth of tax dollars? Are you okay with paying taxes like that for people like me? And the other question you ask yourself, well, okay, that's how much it cost. Is our country better off now because our crew went to prison? I'm really asking you that question real. I'm not asking a rhetorical question. I think that those are questions that deserve an answer from taxpayers. As a taxpayer, are you okay with subsidizing that kind of cost? Those are the victims that I could think of in our crime. Even though they called it a victimless crime, I still thought those were the victims. Can you think of any other people who you think might be victims in this operation that we were running? I'm going to say, I'm not saying I didn't break the law. I mean, I crossed the line, that's for sure. I literally crossed state lines, bringing my illegal substance over state lines. Somebody asked me, well, would you do it again? Probably not, because it's over. I don't feel sorry, but I probably wouldn't do it again because it's the end of an era. It's not going to be illegal for much longer as we're speaking right now. Even Utah, one of the most conservative states in the union, if not the, just went up to the voters in November and they voted to legalize it. Over 87% of the people in our state, which would include very active Mormons, most of those are very active Mormons, the surveys said they would like to legalize and regulate marijuana. So when it's not a contraband, there's not nearly as much profit involved. And that was a big part of why we did it. It was very lucrative. I talked to a kid the other day and I asked him, how much is it going for right now? And he said $800. When we were selling weed for wholesale, we sold it at $1,600. That's half of what we bought. Since they took out our crew of 5 to 7 people, probably it's been replaced by 14 to 21 people since then, and the price has dropped. You gotta, it's like a hydra. You cut off one head and 2 grow back. Well, I just guess this war on drugs is doing really well. I will tell you, I really feel confused being convicted of a victimless crime for things that are already legal and are going to become more and more legal as we go. States like Utah or Tennessee, all these conservative states, particularly Utah, the church leadership, they absolutely say this will never be recreational in this state. Yes, it will. It will. We'll wear you down. Might take 10, it might take 20 years, but it will be legal because you want to tax it and you want to pay for your schools and you have lots of projects that you want to pay for, and you will legalize weed completely, particularly as the younger generation comes up, even through the state of Utah. It will be legalized, and I mean completely legalized, like beer or wine. Utah came through the prohibition in the 20s and now it's legal beer and wine in the state, and weed will be too. They can say whatever they want. And yet I have a felony and went to prison for this. It's all in timing. We were caught between the crosshairs of the federal government's war on drugs and the state's right to legalize marijuana. The other thing I would say about timing, this is an historic time. It's like we were living in a movie in the thick of it all. It was like being in Prohibition with suffragettes trying to get their rights, and with Prohibition in the 20s trying to get their rights back in the 30s. This is a very historic time in our nation. We were just a little bit too far ahead of the curve. In this series, I have so much to say. Yet, in spite of the negative drama with the feds, some of those some of those feds are just really sad people. They're just so sad. I loved being an insider in this industry. It was intriguing And like I told you before, it was really fun and we made a lot of money. At times, it was really wild and terrifying. But I'd like to invite you to come listen to my tales, and you can make up your own mind about me. This is my story, not the government's. As you listen to the coming episodes, you can think of me what you will. You might think I'm a criminal, or a pioneer, maybe a businesswoman, or an opportunist, or maybe all of the above. You be the judge. What do you think about the war on drugs? Is it necessary? Is it effective? That's kind of a complex question. It's not really a yes or no, is it? It depends on what kind of drugs, and it depends on what kind of war, and there's so many things that go into the war on drugs, and I'm just a little cog in the wheel in this war. I'm more than a cog, I'm a casualty, you could say, but I'm still standing. Well, time's up for tonight, so don't jaywalk. That'll get you 5 to 10, or text while you're driving, because that could get you 10 to 20. But most of all, don't do anything I would do. We'll see you later next episode. Bye-bye.